faithfully delivering value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hi, this is Sally Talks Books, and today we're diving into the book Competitive Strategy. Before we jump into today's discussion, let me share a story about business competition. Back in the 1930s, athletic shoes were a niche market, mostly just for athletes. Those athletic shoes weren't comfortable or lightweight, and designs for different sports barely differed. Like soccer and running shoes were practically the same. Adolf Dassler, who started Adidas, saw this as illogical. For instance, sprint shoes should be super light, while soccer shoes need max grip. By designing shoes for specific sports, athletes could seriously boost their performance. So, Adidas rolled out all kinds of specialized shoes: sprint, distance, soccer, high jump, and pro athletes loved them. At the 1972 Munich Olympics, 1,164 out of 1,490 athletes wore Adidas, but it was Nike that broke Adidas's dominance in sportwear. One of Nike's partners in the 1970s, Bill Bowerman, got inspiration from waffles and created a waffle-soled training shoe with awesome traction.
While Adidas focused on pros, Nike's waffle shoe was for everyday joggers, launching just as America caught running fever.
And by the late 1970s, 30 million Americans were into jogging. Nike jumped on this wave and quickly grabbed a huge chunk of the sportswear market. By 1990, Nike held 30% of the U.S. athletic shoe market, while Adidas, who had 70% a decade earlier, plummeted to just 2.9%. Over the years, Adidas and Nike have pushed hard, expanding into almost every sport.
Just when everyone was used to the Adidas-Nike rivalry, Lululemon quietly emerged. They specialize in yoga wear and use instructors to market it.
This clever strategy paid off big in a niche market, making them America's third largest sportswear brand. After hearing this history of sportswear brand competition, the question arises, why was Adidas successful? How did Nike manage to pry open Adidas's market? And how did Lululemon find a new path between these giants?
In short, how should businesses formulate competitive strategies to succeed?
That's exactly what the book Competitive Strategy aims to answer. First published in 1980, this book is a groundbreaking work in business strategy. Most business schools worldwide offer dedicated courses on its concepts. The author, Michael Porter, is among the greatest modern business thinkers, hailed as the father of competitive strategy. He holds honorary doctorates from many universities and received the influential Adam Smith Award in economics, the Wells Prize in Economics, and the McKinsey Award 3 times. He's also a university professor at Harvard Business School. This honorary title was created by Harvard in 1935 to recognize individuals who break traditional boundaries with outstanding contributions. Michael Porter is only the 4th professor in Harvard's history to receive this honor. In the book, he builds an analytical framework, including the 5 forces model for industry analysis, competitor analysis framework, and 3 generic competitive strategies. These methods help corporate strategists cut through complex information, broaden competitive perspectives, form analytical approaches, and ultimately find strategies. Next, I'll introduce the book's main ideas through 3 questions. First, where does a company's competition come from? Second, how should a company analyze its competitors? Third, what strategies can companies use to respond to competition? Let's start with the first question. Where does a company's competition come from? Have you ever wondered about this? In the same market environment and time period, why do some industries profit while others lose money? And within the same industry, why do some companies profit while others lose money? So, the author proposes 5 key factors affecting industry barriers and competitiveness: threat of new entrants, threat of substitutes, bargaining power of buyers, bargaining power of suppliers, and rivalry among existing competitors. A company's ability to handle these 5 factors forms its 5 major competitive forces, famously known as Porter's 5 forces. These 5 competitive forces can be divided into horizontal competition within the industry and vertical competition along the supply chain. Next, I'll explain each aspect step by step, starting with horizontal and vertical. Horizontal competition within the industry includes three parts: rivalry among existing competitors, threat of new entrants, and threat of substitute products or services. Rivalry among existing competitors is easy to grasp. It's like sharing a big pie where everyone wants a bigger slice. Some industries have a small pie or too many players, and uh, competition becomes extremely fierce, like in the home appliance industry. As household usage saturates, the pie shrinks, yet appliance firms remain numerous. Thus, competition in appliances is intense. In contrast, industries with a larger pie or fewer rivals have milder competition, like apparel. Men, women, old, young, tall, short, fat, thin. All seasons bring diverse, personalized needs. But so the pie is huge. Even with many players, farms find unique paths, making apparel competition relatively mild. Now, let's discuss the threat of new entrants. Generally, new entrants bring changes to an industry. Their entry often leads to two outcomes: falling prices or rising costs, like in the courier industry, which was already highly competitive. Prices for bulk e-commerce shipments were typically 3 to 5 yuan per order.
But around 2020, new entrant JT Express slashed unit prices below 1 yuan, forcing rivals to follow to keep market share.
Overall prices dropped about 20% from the original 3 to 5 yuan, severely weakening industry profitability. Third, horizontal competitiveness deals with the threat of substitute products. For existing firms, the threat of substitutes is often devastating. For instance, after LED lights were invented, their superior energy efficiency led many countries to phase out incandescent bulbs. That concludes horizontal competition within the industry.
Now let's examine vertical competitiveness along the supply chain, mainly focusing on both ends: buyers' bargaining power and suppliers' bargaining power.
First, buyers' bargaining power. As buyers, they typically demand lower prices, better quality, or more services. Buyers actually hope competitors will fully compete so they can choose the best value option. Generally, since buyers are dispersed, their bargaining power isn't usually high. But when a buyer purchases huge volumes, accounting for significant seller revenue, they gain strong bargaining power. For example, in the ocean cruise industry, oil companies as sole buyers have immense bargaining power. In apparel, distributors at various levels significantly impact retailers. So apparel manufacturers face strong bargaining power from distributors too. Now, suppliers' bargaining power. When few firms control a highly concentrated suppliers industry, their bargaining power strengthens. Take chips, used everywhere from phones to smart homes, but only a handful of global manufacturers exist.
Thus, chip suppliers wield high bargaining power. These five forces collectively shape industry structure.
Industries with high entry barriers and few substitutes are typically controlled by powerful oligopolies like heavy industries, aircraft, ships. Industries with many substitutes and competitors see lower profits and vulnerability to vertical integration. Steel companies average under 3% margins, lower than heavy machinery's 5%. Within industries, firms face these five forces. Leaders excel at managing channels and suppliers. They secure stable customers and cheaper materials. Firms fighting for every customer while facing substitution threats show weaker overall strength. This concludes part 1. Where does a company's competition come from? The author introduced Porter's 5 forces to explain industry or company competitiveness. Since competing in an industry, companies must fully understand rivals. Know yourself and know your enemy to win every battle.
That's what we'll cover in part 2.
So, how should companies analyze competitors? The author's approach involves 2 steps. First, analyze 4 key elements of competitors. These 4 elements are how competitors position themselves and what their future goals are, what their current strategies include, and whether they can achieve those goals and strategies. Of course, competitors won't volunteer this info, but companies can still gather it through various methods. First, companies can investigate competitors' market expectations and financial targets. This information comes from published financial reports and executives' public speeches, interviews, or discussions. This data reveals potential competitive tactics rivals might employ.
For example, if market share is their priority, they might burn cash in price wars to capture users.
If profits come first, they may raise prices or focus on premium products for high-end markets. Second, examine competitors' management composition and backgrounds. Who's their CEO? What's their background? Which young managers received company awards? From this, companies gauge management styles and predict future directions, whether aggressive or conservative. Take Steve Jobs at Apple. He drove relentless technological innovation. The iPod revolutionized music. The iPhone transformed smartphones. Under Tim Cook, Apple shifted to iterative upgrades rather than disruptive innovations. Furthermore, analyzing competitors' corporate history helps identify strengths, weaknesses, and future trends. For instance, where have they excelled historically? Product launches or innovative marketing? Undoubtedly, in areas where competitors excel, even when entering new markets, they're confident about gaining traction quickly.
For example, Tencent excels at leveraging its traffic advantage to succeed rapidly in new fields.
Take the board game market. Our game dominated initially, but Tencent launched similar QQ games. With Tencent's larger user base, QQ games matched our game's user count within a year. 2 years later, our game's chairman resigned under pressure, marking its defeat. Fourth, the author notes. If competitors operate as business units within larger corporations, monitor the parent company's activities. What role does this unit play in the parent company's business strategy? Is it core, strongly supported, or marginalized? Has the parent company planned diversification into other areas? For instance, community group buying saw fierce competition recently, with multiple giants investing heavily. Like Pinduoduo, Duoduo Grocery, Meituan's Meituan Select, and Didi's Changshin Yushuan, these community group buying services operate as business units within larger corporations. But clearly, commitment levels differed. Pinduoduo and Meituan prioritized it, while Didi shifted strategy. Changshin Yushuan scaled back.
Finally, the author stresses watching market signals, meaning any competitor action.
Such as product announcements, new funding rounds, or executives' market outlook statements. These are crucial signals companies must monitor closely.
For example, a rival announcing massive funding signals industry optimism, but also warns of price wars for market share.
Similarly, a company planning price cuts might pre-announce them with cost change explanations. Other companies need to seize this market signal and figure out whether it's purely about gaining market share through price wars, or because they made a tech breakthrough or locked down a key supplier. Market signals from competitors might also reveal their misjudgments. For example, a competitor might think they've got the highest customer loyalty, but that's not really the case. Then the company can use provocative price cuts to snag a competitive edge. After analyzing the 4 key elements of competitors, we move to step 2, predicting how competitors might react. These are the 3 big judgments companies make after piecing together all that analysis. The first judgment is about the offensive moves competitors could launch. In other words, based on assumptions about their future goals and analysis of their competitive strength, what strategic shifts are they most likely to kick off? And how strong and committed will they be in rolling out this move? For instance, in the 1950s, Gerber, an American baby food maker, kept saying the baby boom was coming, birth rates would soar, and they positioned themselves as the top player. So other firms could guess that Gerber would ramp up production and marketing over the next few years to grab more market share. The second judgment is about competitors' defensive capabilities. A key part of this is pinpointing where competitors' weak spots are, how to zero in on those weaknesses.
Launch attacks that force them into reactive mode, or even scare them from making a move.
For example, in the 1970s, a small coffee brand called Folgers aimed to use price cuts to chip away at Maxwell House's turf. In the eastern U.S. market, since Maxwell House had a huge market share, fighting back with price cuts would have cost them big financially. Competitors' defensive abilities also show in what company actions might trigger their retaliation?
Even if retaliation is pricey and hurts their bottom line, they'll do it anyway.
Like in China's color TV industry in the late 1990s, the price war happened because every company saw themselves as low-cost makers. In 1996, when Changhong Color TVs cut prices by 18%, brands like Konka and TCL immediately followed suit. This unprecedented price war directly reshaped China's color TV industry. The third judgment involves choosing the battlefield. Companies can predict where they'll clash with competitors by aligning with their own products and goals. How should companies act when entering competitors' core territories? Ideally, find the strategy that leaves competitors helpless based on their current situation.
For example, to attack dominant companies, put them in a dilemma where any choice hurts them.
Take IBM in the 1960s. It held over 50% market share in mainframe computers. Meanwhile, DC and Hewlett-Packard competed mainly with mini-computers. IBM faced exactly that dilemma. Should they shift to mini-computers, threatening their business, or protect their mainframe dominance, especially since IBM also made mini-computers? This was a tough choice for IBM. Making mini-computers meant competing with themselves and accelerating mainframe obsolescence. But abandoning mini-computers risked disaster if mainframes became obsolete. IBM ultimately chose to double down on mainframes for enterprise clients. But abandoning mini-computers cost dearly. DC soon dominated that market. Then Apple built on mini-computer tech to create microcomputers, launching the PC era. IBM, once computing's leader, missed the golden decade of PC development. They didn't launch their first PC until 1981. Finally, the author stresses making competitor analysis routine and real-time. Companies need full competitor intelligence systems. Key modules include data collection, classification, analysis, strategist communication, and strategic recommendations. All right, that wraps up part 2. How should companies analyze competitors? It mainly involves 2 steps. The first is analyzing the 4 key elements of competitors. The second step is analyzing and predicting competitors' reactions. Once you know their moves, companies can adopt counter strategies. This brings us to part 3 today, the famous Porter's 3 generic strategies. The first major strategy is overall cost leadership, which requires companies to boost economies of scale and expand production capacity. For example, a company producing 100,000 units a year will definitely have lower average costs than one making just 10,000. Additionally, companies need strict cost control in management and minimize expenses in R&D, service, sales, team management, and advertising. So, some firms adopt vertical integration, meaning building industrial clusters. Industrial clusters are common in manufacturing. Big auto groups like GAC and Changang not only make cars, but also have dedicated engine plants, core parts factories, logistics, and even their own auto insurance and finance companies. Since these companies belong to the same group, they can maximize cost reductions. The low-cost advantage from overall cost leadership gives companies the power to counter strong buyers.
Even if buyers pressure for price cuts, it won't hurt the firm's low-cost edge, and it helps resist tough suppliers.
Even if raw material costs rise, other costs are low enough to give the company wiggle room. Once a firm gains a low-cost advantage, it can help them lead the industry. For instance, in the crane industry, Harnischfeger started with just 15% market share. In 1979, the company redesigned cranes, updating the structure to reduce material usage and lower costs. On the other hand, optimizing manufacturing cut material waste, allowing crane prices to drop by 15%. This significantly boosted competitiveness, raising market share to 25%. Most importantly, overall cost leadership can help companies achieve a virtuous cycle. The bigger the scale effect, the lower the costs and higher the profits. Companies can reinvest those profits into new equipment to further boost their cost advantage and cement their industry leadership.
The second major strategy is differentiation, providing unique products or services recognized industry-wide. like distinctive tech, performance, service, or marketing channels.
The ideal scenario is when a company excels at differentiation across multiple fronts. Like Lululemon, we mentioned earlier, they developed yoga wear that shapes the body uniquely, plus tapped into yoga instructors for hyper-targeted marketing. Differentiation boosts consumer brand loyalty. Take Apple. Its products stand out in design, OS, and performance, creating fiercely loyal Apple fans who care less about price. This lets companies rake in high profits without competing on cost. For instance, Apple's iPhone gross margins hit around 50%, way above competitors.
But differentiation can limit market share growth.
Building uniqueness comes with high costs. Premium materials, custom designs, which drive up prices. Higher costs mean higher prices.
So while most appreciate the quality, not everyone can or will pay premium prices.
Like in Q3 2021, China top phone sellers were Vivo, Oppo, Huawei, including Honor, while Apple ranked 5th. The third strategy is focus. This means targeting specific customer groups, product segments, or regional markets. Let's stick with phones, for example. Before 2015, there was a unique phone category, contract phones.
EZT, Lenovo, and Coolpad dominated this space. Classic focus strategy players.
They partnered with specific carriers, supplying products exclusively through them. Contract phones were only available via carrier plans. The benefit: contract brands gained stable customers without market development, reducing costs.
But focus strategy inherently limits total market share potential.
Regarding these three strategies, the author advises choosing one, wavering between them risks strategic limbo. Trying to be cost leader while pursuing industry-wide differentiation or niche differentiation cost advantage usually fails all objectives. 1. These strategies require conflicting conditions. Few firms can execute all three. Once stuck in limbo, escaping demands time and effort. Failure is inevitable without decisive commitment. In autos, GM uses cost leadership, Mercedes employs differentiation. Both are profit leaders, while Chrysler and Fiat lacked clear strategy. They had neither cost advantage nor differentiation or focus. Classic strategic limbo. These are the core three strategies. Specific industries develop unique approaches. Today's society constantly spawns emerging industries. I'll use emerging industries to illustrate unique competitive strategies.
Emerging industries lack established rules or economies of scale to deter new entrants.
In emerging industries, firms face several common competitive challenges. First, horizontal competition's biggest threat comes from substitute products. When photovoltaic solar emerged, electrical equipment makers lobbied governments against subsidies. They argued solar couldn't address peak hour electricity capacity issues. In vertical competition, emerging industries face significant challenges too, like raw material shortages, because in brand new industries, production of certain materials and components hasn't caught up yet. Additionally, products in emerging industries are heavily influenced by buyers. Customers' limited product understanding leads to poor initial sales. Well, for example, consumers' lack of knowledge about electric vehicles results in much lower purchase intent compared to traditional gas cars. So, for competitive strategies in emerging industries, the author recommends three main approaches. First, thoroughly assess market conditions. Identify where to enter first, like in fresh produce group buying, targeting Tier 1 cities works best. Because Tier 1 cities have more office workers with late hours, long commutes, and no time for grocery shopping. But in Tier 3 or 4 cities, younger people have shorter commutes or live with parents, making group buying less essential.
Second, leverage first mover advantage to establish industry rules.
Like when food delivery emerged. Elo.me pioneered timeout compensation in 2010, setting delivery time guarantees. This made it hard for new entrants to offer better delivery solutions. Third, consider industry-wide development, not just your own growth. This helps raise entry barriers. For instance, in 2015, CATL partnered with BMW, BAIC, and Geely to upgrade EV battery tech, boosting the entire supply chain and establishing China's global leadership. All right, that concludes part 3. The author proposed 3 competitive strategies: cost leadership, differentiation, and focus. In emerging industries, prioritize market entry points and establish rules while you have first mover advantage. They collaborate with others for industry growth. Building on competitive strategy, Porter later published Competitive Advantage and The Competitive Advantage of Nations. In single quotation mark, competitive advantage, he introduced the value chain theory to analyze internal activities and their relationships, revealing competitive strengths. In the Competitive Advantage of Nations, he proposed the diamond theory, extending corporate competitiveness to national competitiveness, analyzing and researching national value systems.
These 2 books, along with today's competitive strategy, are collectively known as Porter's Competitive Trilogy.
Porter's diamond theory sparked widespread reflection in the management community. Management scholars like Dunning, Carter, Wright, Moon, Rugman, and Verbeeka have continuously refined the diamond theory, expanding its application from analyzing just the U.S. to industrially advanced nations like the UK and Europe, and smaller economies reliant on global markets like Korea and Singapore. The author's theory has been highly esteemed. Even Peter Drucker, hailed as the father of modern management, said, "Porter is one of the few who's genuinely contributed to management." The paper management scholar Davenport ranked Porter first in his list of the top 200 management gurus, praising him as the one who truly ushered the industrial economy into the business strategy era. However, many management scholars have questioned Porter's theories, believing they have limitations. They argue that Porter's theory relies on 3 key assumptions to function. First, that strategists can fully understand the entire industry. Second, that firms in the same industry only compete and never cooperate. Third, that an industry's pie is fixed, and growth can only come by taking rivals' shares.
But in reality, these assumptions can be broken. First, no strategist can fully grasp the entire industry.
Second, in the real business world, firms aren't always in life or death competition with peers, or upstream or downstream partners. Sometimes, partnerships between strong firms, or strong and weak ones, can create greater value and better serve corporate interests. Third, and most importantly, firms can maximize their value by collaborating with others to grow the overall industry pie. Thus, Porter's theory is often called typical business idealism. But even Porter's critics admit his strategic analysis framework has broad applicability, enabling a systematic view of competition and finding breakthrough directions. Okay, competitive strategy. That wraps up our interpretation of this book. Reading notes are below the audio. See you next time.